Hello, everyone, and welcome to the eighth ever episode of the Rays Hail Report. I am your host, Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by New Orleans Saints beat reporter Matthew Paris. Matthew, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, I appreciate you hopping on. And, before we get into some Commanders talk, obviously with the Saints, you got training camp starting up soon. Derek Carr retires. Tyler Shaw is now the quarterback. What's that reporting been like recently for you?
Yeah, it was really kind of hectic because
Mhm,
the Derek Carr injury was very much a mystery for months
mhm.
until it came out that it was severe enough that he had to retire. That took us all by surprise down here, and then um, that coincided with Tyler Shucks. They drafted him before before Carr officially retired, but
Mhm,
um, now you're working on a quarterback profile of someone new and his journey, and then the Derek Carr story is still there's still some. I mean, maybe things I'd like to pluck, but
mhm.
I don't know. It's we'll have to see if that happens. But it was a really interesting experience covering it. That's for sure.
100%. And then, this offseason in free agency, the Commanders added former Saints safety Will Harris, and I want to talk about that addition a little bit. Harris played in the slot a lot for the Saints last season, but then, his primary position, safety, he played a little bit of cornerback as well. And then I think he even played a season as linebacker with the Lions. So, what kind of versatility can we expect for him to bring to Washington in their secondary this year?
Yeah. Not to correct you
Mhm,
a little bit, sorry, but um, in New Orleans, he was actually more of just a post safety.
mhm.
He wasn't really used in the slot much. That was more
Okay.
so in Detroit, where he
Mhm.
was from, and where um, Lance Newmark
Yeah.
uh, was part of the regime that drafted him there with Washington or with Detroit
Mhm,
previously. But still pretty versatile,
mhm,
really rangy is kind of how I would describe him. That's how the last coaching staff did as well. Uh, Pretty dependable. Ended up starting a lot. I think almost he missed a stretch with the hamstring injury, but
mhm.
besides that, was a really kind of dependable player. It was pretty fascinating to see his journey throughout camp because that spot specifically across from Tyron Matthew was really kind of unsettled for most of the offseason. They brought him in on a pretty cheap deal, but it got to a point where they explored signing Justin Simmons. That didn't work out. But then as camp progressed, Will Harris really locked that position down and it really became a player
Mhm,
that they could rely upon. And so, they chose not to bring him back. They ended up signing Justin Reed on a much bigger deal, much splashier.
mhm.
Um, but I think for what they had last year, he was a pretty good player for them.
And then the Commanders lost Jeremy Chin to the Raiders this offseason. He was their primary safety. What are some of the key components of Will Harris' play style that we can expect to see in Washington? Maybe some that will kind of help make up for that loss of Chin.
Yeah, the guy hits really hard.
Mhm,
He's a really nice tackler. Um, like I said, rangy on the back end. You can put him back there, and I think be okay. Um, it's you know he is like the way that the Saints defense worked under Dennis Allen was
mhm,
the safeties were interchangeable. So actually, like even though I said he was rangy on the back end, they had Tyron Matthew playing the post a lot. You could really put Will Harris in the box,
mhm,
um, and then depending on the look or if the offense motion, like they would switch mid play. It's kind of reminiscent to how um, if you remember back in the you might not hear,
mhm,
but
mhm,
in like 2018 with when the Washington safeties were like Monte Nicholson and
mhm,
DJ Swearinger, they
mhm.
kind of like did that mixing and matching.
Yeah.
It's a lot of defenses around the NFL do it, so it's not specific to New Orleans, but that's kind of what it reminded me of.
And I know you mentioned the big hits. He might have a little unfinished business with CD Lamb that we'll
Yeah,
have to see this season after that hit from last year.
yeah,
Um, but Harris is 2 years older than Jeremy Chin. He's turning 30 in December, and Washington is already the oldest team throughout the entire NFL. They obviously added Von Miller yesterday. Is age something to maybe be concerned about? Could that potentially affect his on-field production going forward?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I didn't really see signs of him slowing down per se,
Mhm,
but once you reach that age, as someone who is now in his 30s,
mhm, yeah,
you do notice a difference
mhm,
even anecdotally. But it like this is what I think is really fascinating about
mhm,
Washington's situation is they're clearly going all in around Jaden Daniels,
mhm,
trying to capitalize on that window, and I think that's a smart approach.
mhm,
But because you have the oldest roster in the league, do these guys hold up? I'm sure we'll talk about Marshawn Lattimore in a second. He's the guy I would be more so worried about um, in terms of just age and health and all
yeah.
that. Um, but it's you want to surround these guys who are ready to win and can potentially still win. And I like the big swings. Watching from afar.
Mhm. And then last season with New Orleans, Harris had 1 interception, 5 passes defended, 74 total tackles, 3 of which were tackles for loss. Over the next 2 years, is he a guy that could lock down Washington's strong safety position? Or do you think that maybe even after adding him, that room could still be open to add a player next offseason, whether that's in free agency or through the draft?
Yeah, I think he's the type of player that if you look to replace him, you would. Like
Mhm,
but he's also good enough to where like, okay, we don't have to reach for safety here in round two. It just kind of depends on how the board um, shakes out, and so I think he's very dependable. He's
mhm, yeah,
reliable. He's not going to be a superstar, but you need guys like that on your roster, and
mhm.
so I don't think I know Jeremy Chin played well for Washington last year. Um, I think Harris is a dependable type of replacement.
And then the contract he received was a 2-year, $8 million deal worth up to $10 million. How would you just evaluate that contract on Washington's end? Was it a fair deal? How do you see that contract aging, 2 years from now throughout his time in Washington?
Yeah, it was. I think it's fine. I mean,
Mhm,
I don't know what the guaranteed money is on it,
mhm,
but I'm pretty sure you could get out of it easily if you wanted to next year. If he doesn't play up to expectations, if he plays solid, then you have him around next year. Like this is not the type of deal that's going to hurt your cap or limit, Adam
mhm.
Peters and them what they want to do. So it was smart, I thought.
Now, one thing, obviously, I mentioned he was a little bit older earlier in the video, but you look at a young secondary that Washington's building with guys like Quan Martin, Mikey Sanders still, Trey Amos, who was their second round pick, who they just signed about 10 minutes ago. What kind of veteran leadership can we expect Harris to bring to that secondary that Washington has currently?
Yeah, he was a bit of a quieter guy in
Mhm,
New Orleans. Tyron Matthew really led the room there.
mhm,
Even a guy like, if you want to include the cornerbacks, Marshawn Lattimore
mhm,
was a guy
yep,
people looked to. Um, it was a group that didn't have like a really defined leader except for Tyron Matthew. I think that's part of one of the reasons why New Orleans brought in Justin Reed this offseason is to kind of strengthen the voice a little bit. Um, Will Harris really kept to himself, was super pleasant and nice to deal with from a media perspective,
mhm,
but just I think a little bit on the quieter side, at least in terms of player interaction. Or I mean, I don't know for sure, but I don't
mhm,
remember anyone being like, Will Harris, that guy is like an incredible leader for us. But that's not to
yeah.
say, like, again, you don't need necessarily that
Mhm. I mean, he's
bolstered
not a
voice.
bad leader, he just wasn't necessarily the guy to
Yeah.
step up.
And I mean, yes, it is a very um, young secondary, but
Mhm.
also like it's a pretty old defense in general.
Yeah.
And so you have that collective, like people will look to Bobby Wagner, even if he's not in
Mhm,
like
mhm,
the defensive back room, for instance.
mhm. And then, getting into Marshawn Lattimore, who the Commanders traded for, last season, he was dealing with a hamstring injury throughout the year last year that really did affect him on the field even when he was out there. Now that he looks to be fully healthy, what can we expect to see from him in this Commanders secondary?
Yeah. Well, let's assume that he's healthy, like in
Mhm,
terms of
mhm,
like he'll stay healthy.
mhm,
Very physical corner. He does let the emotions get the best of him sometimes, as we saw last year.
mhm,
But there were questions last year going into camp of whether he still had it, and that stretch before he got hurt in the season, he
mhm.
was playing really well.
Yeah.
Like he's the type of corner that you can just leave on an island. I actually thought one of his better games was against New Orleans in his return. Like they
Mhm.
New Orleans didn't even target him once. I think
Yeah.
that was kind of indicative of the type of player he can still be. The concern I think most people have is, even if he's healthy, he doesn't stay healthy long. Like
Mhm,
I'm thinking back to last year in camp, he missed most of training camp with, I forget the ailment right now. I think it was a hamstring. It was a soft tissue issue because New
mhm,
Orleans had
mhm.
a million soft tissue injuries. But it was the type of thing that like kept him out for most of camp, and then he was ready to go by the regular season and got hurt again. Um, he's just like you just have to hold your breath with him, and
Mhm,
it'll be real interesting to see how this year goes for the Commanders and him specifically, because I think one of the parts of his deal is like they can cut bait real easy if they need to. Like his contract does not have,
mhm.
I don't think, any guarantees left. It's um, it's just something that they can wipe their hands clean if it goes wrong.
And then you kind of touched on this, but hopefully he can stay healthy. This is a guy who has played 10 or less games in his past 3 seasons, dating back to 2022. But the last thing I kind of want to ask about when it comes to Marshawn Lattimore, right after this move, you were talking with Commanders reporter Scott Abraham,
Sure.
and you stated when you were talking to him, Lattimore, quote, really gets up for those big time opponents. He really does shine against those star receivers. Can you just touch on how important that is, especially in the NFC East when you're going up against guys like CD Lamb and AJ Brown and Malik Neighbors 2 times the season?
Yeah, I mean the best rivalry down here. Is Tampa Bay on your guys' schedule?
I have to double check that one. I know
Yeah,
they were
it's
last year, so I don't know if they are this year, but I have to
right.
check that one.
If he gets to go against Mike Evans, that matchup is so
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
In terms of just um, it always fireworks. It reminds me a lot of when I covered Washington before, of Josh
Mhm.
Norman against Odell Beckham,
Oh, yeah. Mhm,
or Des Bryant. Like
mhm,
it's the type of rivalry you don't really see that much
mhm,
of anymore. And man, it's so fun. But that's the type of thing that he's a very prideful guy. Doesn't like talking about opposing receivers.
mhm,
You can just tell there's something in him that really does rise up to the occasion. I think it sometimes comes back to bite him. I mean, you saw in that Philly game last year, um, where they kind of went after him, and he let the emotions get the best of
mhm.
him. But he is a guy that runs hot at times, and I think it's cool to cover. I like writing about that sort of thing.
Yeah, I was gonna mention we are gonna have to kinda see, what that looks like when he's going up now against AJ Brown 2 times a year, and you talked about it, how he got a little bit emotional in the NFC Championship game last season. But with that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up? Where they can find some of your work?
Yeah, you can find me at the Times of the Cune. I cover New Orleans now. People may remember me from covering the Commanders for the Washington Times back for a few years there. And so just check out my work on NOLA.com and follow me on Twitter at Matthew_Paris.
Absolutely. Has that been kind of a tough transition? With a Washington team that really struggled, and now seeing them, thrive this past season.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's tough. The
Hmm.
moment of FOMO I did have was on the Hail Mary. That was like the
Yeah,
one
yeah.
the one thing I really wanted to like. That
Mhm,
would have been awesome to cover. The playoffs would have been cool. I mean, the Super Bowl was in New Orleans, so I was kind of secretly like hoping that Washington
mhm,
would come down. But
mhm,
it was honestly great from a Philly perspective because the Saints ended up hiring Kellen Moore, so
mhm,
there
mhm.
was like a
Yeah.
great to use that week
Mhm,
to get to know Kellen a little bit, and then also just cover Zach Bond. There was a bunch of like Eagles Saints related storylines that made that week particularly kind of easy and nice. But it's been cool. I mean, the whole thing was the whole time I was there was, could they find the quarterback? Could they find the quarterback? And Jaden
Mhm.
Daniels, wow, I just was super impressed with him. Even in the game in person that I was able to see him, was that guy is unreal. So
Yeah.
we have a special one there.
Absolutely. And, if you're watching this, you made it up to this point, can't thank you enough for tuning in. Make sure you do like and subscribe. It's free and it really helps out the channel. As always, we will see you next time.